Bueno, muy buenos días. ¿Cómo están? ¿Cómo los trata Cartagena? Bien. Bueno, nos alegra mucho que estén acá. Muchísimas gracias a los organizadores, al Acero, por esta invitación. Estamos muy contentos de tenerlos aquí en Colombia, felices de traer este magnífico evento. Thank you very much, Anthony, for being here with us. First, I want to say is congratulations for the tremendous work you've been doing in the Steel Committee at OECD. I want also say that we're using this information that you produce to speak and to talk to the government in order to get these measures to attack these distortions in the market. And I have a great news to tell you. Today, the Colombian government just published a new measure announcing an increasing tariff for steel coming from countries that has no trade agreement with Colombia. I'm going to say it now in Spanish, but me complace contarles que el gobierno colombiano esta mañana publicó un decreto para comentarios anunciando 13 partidas arancelarias que van a tener incrementos en arancel por cuenta de estas distorsiones de mercado, ¿no? Con el gobierno hemos venido trabajando desde hace 2 años ya en estas medidas y nos alegra muchísimo porque llega en muy buen momento. Estamos en Colombia recibiendo un fuerte ataque también de esta competencia desleal y de una solicitud inicial de 34 partidas arancelarias, hemos logrado 13 partidas con incrementos de arancel. Nos alegra muchísimo, queremos públicamente expresar el agradecimiento al gobierno colombiano en cabeza del ministerio de Mario Valencia, un gran aliado del sector. Entonces, creo que es una fabulosa noticia para comenzar este panel. So, thank you very much again, Anthony, for being here with us. We're going to talk about the global overcapacity. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, I have a short presentation, but good morning, representatives of industry and government, stakeholders, friends and colleagues. I wanted to say a few words about efforts at the OECD to address global steel excess capacity. The timing of this meeting is perfect as we just finished our OECD Steel Week. Last week, the Steel Committee met in the beginning of the week, and then we met with a global forum on steel excess capacity to look at or start the work on the development of a comprehensive framework for joint action. I want to mention also a big accomplishment from last week. First of all, the meetings, we made a lot of progress in the meetings, but we also launched the LATAM Steel Trade Radar. And this is the first time that we're going to be working with an industry partner to look at the impacts of global excess capacity, the harmful impacts this is having on steel industries in Latin America through the trade of steel, the direct trade of steel, but also the indirect trade of steel. This is a very important initiative because not all members of Latin America, not all countries of Latin America are members of the OECD or of the Steel Committee or of the Global Forum. And it's very important for us to work on a radar like this that increases awareness of the problems of excess capacity, and also as a tool that could inform policymaking in Latin America to hopefully work towards a more level playing field in Latin America. So I'll just say a few words about the outcomes of last week's steel meetings. First and foremost, members met. We had more than 40 delegations that met to discuss the pervasive use of market-distorting subsidies and non-market policies that are distorting steel prices around the world, that are leading to loss of market share for our member countries through the surge of dumped and subsidized steel on international markets. And it's really creating national and economic security risks for many of our members. The situation is still very bleak, unfortunately. We're in our fourth year or so of demand contraction, steel demand contraction worldwide. Steelmaking capacity, on the other hand, has been increasing for 7 years in a row. This year alone, we have an increase of 74 million tons of global steel excess capacity, while the demand is flat this year. And so we're expecting to see the biggest rise in global excess capacity this year than we've seen since the global financial and economic crisis of 2009. Sorry, we can't see this. This is just to say that China now accounts for 45% of the global excess capacity. And this is growing. Our short-term indicators show that this is growing. And this has, of course, important implications where the steel radar can be very helpful to give warning signals of where that steel may be going to through either direct steel or through third markets that are already saturated with steel, what the impacts of trade measures will be on that steel. Will it be diverted or deflected to Latin America, and so on and so forth. We are on track to reach our previous projection that global steel excess capacity will reach 721 million tons by 2027. This was the forecast that we released in May in the Steel Outlook. We are now starting to update the numbers a little bit. It looks like we will meet this forecast maybe even sooner than previously expected. The new numbers show that we have now, in the 2026 to 28 period, we have 109 million tons of new capacity that is likely to come on stream. And I just want to stress, that's more than the capacity of the whole Latin American region. So we're going to see in the next 3 years, we're going to see a whole new capacity amounting to a new Latin America on the market. And many of these investments are also taking place through Chinese investments overseas. This slide is just to show how the Chinese economy, which accounts now, of course, for the major share of global excess capacity, how it's dealing with this. It's not taking market-oriented reforms in its country to, adjust that capacity downwards. Instead, it's maintaining capacity at high levels, maintaining production at high levels, and it's dealing with a surplus through exports of steel, as we can see in the yellow line there. Exports of steel from China reached a record level of 118 million tons last year. This year, there's been further growth, and we're likely to see exports rise to around 125 or even more in the course of this year. Some countries, a lot of countries are taking actions, of course, trade actions, but we see that sometimes this is not having very much effect because the composition of the products that are being exported is changing to avoid those measures. And this is particularly hard for regions that are less protected, regions in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that are more vulnerable to displacement and price competition. Skip that one. I just wanted to also note that there's a lot of work at the OECD on the sources of this global excess capacity, and it's been established, robust research has been done, that market distorting subsidies and non-market policies and practices are the driving source of excess capacity, and they're the sources of the trade problems that we're seeing nowadays in steel. We see that China, of course, has the major share of excess capacity, but we see also that these non-market policies and practices are spreading, especially those regions that have growing steelmaking capacity and now have excess capacities emerging. They're also more prominently using such subsidies and non-market policies. Some examples that we've recently studied are subsidized energy being used in the MENA region, the tax and customs exemptions, sort of non-market loans to steel companies. These kind of subsidies, they're all either encouraging new growth in capacity, or sometimes they keep inefficient mills in the marketplace that should exit. The latest research that we discussed last week also showed that these subsidies in non-member economies lead to an increase of their market shares to the detriment of competitors in OECD countries. Also, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the GEFSEC meeting, the Global Forum. There is now a commitment to work together to really address excess capacity and its impacts. Some of the work that we're going to be taking forward in the months ahead, enhanced monitoring and transparency about non-market policies. Members will exchange information on existing and new tools that they're using to address excess capacity and to see if we can coordinate actions on that front. There's also new work on how to boost the effectiveness of trade actions, helping members to increase their capabilities to identify melt and pour, also to detect and deter circumvention of trade measures, which is a growing problem, and also to exchange information on trade actions being taken and how to make them more effective. But a longer-term measure that is of great significance is this collective action, and this is to work on a comprehensive framework for joint action. We need to deliver the key elements of that by June of next year. Now just a little bit of, on the radar itself, this is very important because, as I mentioned, not all Latin American nations are members of our steel activities at the OECD. And this is really why it's important, of course, is that the steel industry is critical for Latin America's industrial base. It's an industry that accounts for about 1.4 million direct and indirect jobs along the value chain. But it really needs a stable global environment and fair competition to survive. Subsidize and dump steel imports and growing indirect steel import trends are not sustainable. And the sector needs to be shielded from these impacts and take action against excess capacity steel. The radar itself, it's going to provide the evidence base to inform policymaking. The purpose is to show evidence of the harmful impacts of global steel excess capacity on steel trade in Latin America. We want to monitor imports regularly of steel, but also indirect steel, so the steel-intensive products into Latin America from sources of excess capacity. Identify new and emerging ways of how excess capacity steel is entering Latin America through different channels, and provide the data and evidence needed to inform policymakers so that they can take effective policies. The expected outcomes, we hope this leads to a more level playing field for Latin America and other market-oriented steel producers, and promote more viability for the industry. And this, we hope, will be used by stakeholders and policymakers. It's also a regional example that, which could be applied for other regions as well to look at these impacts. And finally, just to say that we aim to have a final report by July of next year. This tool will be updated regularly to include the latest data on direct and indirect steel, unit values of steel so that we can compare the prices from sources of excess capacity and importers. And it will provide also warning signals about potential trade disturbances for Latin American countries. The final report will examine the different channels through which global excess capacity is affecting steel trade, the impacts of trade actions taken by or involving Latin American countries on their steel imports and exports, and then also what policy actions may help to shield the Latin American steel industry from inflows of excess capacity steel. So it's a very exciting project. We hope it's going to be very useful for your region, because your region has been suffering significantly from this excess capacity problem, and we hope it does lead to a level playing field over time. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anthony. Really, really interesting. We had 2 minutes, so we have to be fast to talk a little bit about this information you're giving us. Maybe if you could go a little bit deeper into that countries that are contributing to this overcapacity. Now the problem is China, but it seems to be that later on we're going to have trouble also with India. Maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know if this works. Oh,
yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, exactly how you said too, that right now the current problem is China. It has the biggest excess capacity that has been building up over the years. The sources go back a long time, actually, from the kind of state, the state involvement in the steel industry, the state planning for the size, the composition, the products that are produced. And this has led to the introduction of support measures and subsidies that have led to this concentration of production in China of over 50% of the market. We do see, unfortunately, we see emerging areas that are now have excess capacity that may be increasing. Southeast Asia, of course, is a region where capacity has been increasing very rapidly. Unfortunately, the capacity increases were not aligned with the demand for steel in these countries. In some places like Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, you have sort of 17 million tons right now of excess that needs to find markets as well. This problem is also spreading to the MENA region. We see that Iran, for example, has been on a huge surge of increasing its capacity, which is going to reach about 70 million tons this year. But the demand for steel there is only 20 million tons, so it's building up this excess of 50 million tons. India right now, they have very strong demand for steel. The excess, the capacity is growing very, very fast. It's reached 300 million tons. There is expectations that it will reach 500 million tons by 2047. The only risk there is, of course, that while now the markets may be in balance, there is this risk that the demand for steel will taper off. And like we've seen in so many other economies, like in China too, this always happens. It's very, very hard then to remove that excess once that starts to happen. So we're watching different regions. I think, having said that, I think it's very important for us to talk to these countries to learn from the past experiences as well and what history has shown us about excess capacity buildup.
Okay. And you were talking about this initiative with Acero, which I believe it's amazing. Maybe we could go deeper and explain how useful is this information to tackle this problem of distortion and the thing, the unfair competition. So do you think the main role of this information and this initiative to tackle this problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one main purpose will be to increase awareness, first of all, that action needs to be taken in Latin America, because until now there's been less restrictive measures as compared to many other countries. I think what this tool will allow will be to help to prepare not only the industry but policymakers also to the different ways that excess capacity is entering the Latin American region. We're starting to study this at the OECD to give also kind of warnings that it's not just the direct imports of steel, so the steel products themselves, but what we've seen in some other regions as well too is that when you have trade measures on the direct steel products, then all of a sudden you get imports of indirect steel, so steel containing goods that start to surge because excess capacity in China and some other countries can spread down the value chain. So it's going to give some ways to look at this problem and maybe the tools to allow action. Also, issues such as I was mentioning, circumvention of steel measures. This is a growing problem as well too, knowing where the origins of the steel are actually made and where they're coming from. And I think that this monitor will be helpful for understanding these kind of issues as well.
Definitely. Yep. Colombia is taking action, as I just said, and I feel optimistic about that. Finally, it took us 2 years to go ahead with this measure. 2 years. It's more than double that the average time maybe in Europe to take measures, but maybe to finish, let's say something optimistic about this sector, about this crisis. What do you think? What are the things that makes you feel optimistic about what we're doing?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I'm very optimistic, actually. I've been working at the OECD for 19 years in steel. We've seen the different approaches that have been taken in the OECD and elsewhere to address similar problems. Excess capacity we've had in the past. The players were different, but we had excess capacity in the past. Now we have a much bigger crisis. But this is the first time that I've seen that all countries, all of our members, small countries, small steel producing countries, large steel producing countries, medium size, every member now, all members they're coalescing around this consensus now that really serious action needs to be taken. We can't let this go on anymore because we've lost the steel industry in many of our countries. Efficient steel producers have closed down, huge employment losses, the loss of economic activity in certain communities, and that this situation is posing economic and national security risks. So I think I must say very honestly that this is the first time we had steel subsidies negotiations in the OECD. When I just started, they were just ending, and we weren't able to reach an agreement on refraining and removing subsidies that are contributing to excess capacity. We had an initiative, also in my time, we had a high-level meeting on excess capacity adjustment in the steel industry. We weren't able to get all the countries that are sources of excess capacity to agree on political commitments there. We then had the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity, which in the first few years of its mandate, the Chinese, the Indians, and other major players were at the table who then left, and now we see excess capacity growing again. Now we have a smaller group of like-minded countries, but I've never seen the willingness to really work towards joint action together as strong as it is today. So I am very happy and optimistic. And as I mentioned, next year is going to be a very exciting year for the Global Forum. It's going to be chaired by the United States, and we're going to be running like a marathon to reach results there. So that's our goal.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Time's up. Thank you very much for being here with us. We're sorry that you missed the cocktail last night, but I believe we can fix that. Thank you very much. Gracias a todos.